So welcome. I see people are loading into the webinar. Good morning. It's great to be with you here today. It's nice to have a sunny, beautiful day outside from where I am in Missouri. We had a couple bad storms this week, so it's great to see a sunny day while we can all have this conversation together. As everyone is loading in, we won't officially start for a minute or two, but I do want to welcome you. My name is Lisa Dorner. I'm an associate professor at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and I am also co-project director of SEE-TEL. So that is a National Professional Development Project grant from the Department of Education. Stands for Strengthening Equity and Effectiveness for Teachers of English Learners. The principal investigator, Kim Song, you'll hear from her later in the webinar. She is also here today, and we are glad to be working with NEE, the Network for Educator Effectiveness, on this webinar. So today's webinar, Teaching English Learners and Working with Immigrant Families from Home. So education in the time of COVID-19. We will start in about a minute as people are logging in, and I'll let you know who our panelists are and who the other facilitators are on this webinar today. So one of the first things I'm going to do while people are logging in, we want to have an idea of who's out there, who's been able to log in today and join us. So we have a poll that will pop up on your screen, and I'm going to launch it, and you can let us know while we're waiting for folks to log in, what is your role in education? So are you a teacher that works specifically on English language development with multilingual children, so English learner or ESL teacher? Are you a middle or high school teacher? So we did create this webinar with semi-focus on the secondary level, but of course we welcome elementary or preschool teachers if you couldn't join us yesterday. We did have a webinar yesterday focused on elementary education, and that's been posted on the NEE website. We'll be sharing all these links out with you later so you can share with others or rewatch some of the videos or have links to the resources that are mentioned today. I don't know if my screen sharing shows you the poll in progress, so it looks like we do have a lot of English learner focused teachers out there, but also some middle and high school teachers that I'm guessing have many English learners in their classrooms. So we'll wait another 10 or 15 seconds while folks are logging in so we can then share this poll and see who it is that's been able to join us. It's great to also have some social workers and school counselors, interpreters, family liaisons, and even some district administrators out there. I do want to thank all of you not only for joining us, but we all here, the panelists and all the people that we work with here at the university system and across the state in different districts, we want to applaud you for your work. It's been a challenging couple months. It's hard to believe it's been this long that we've been transferring our work online, doing things in incredibly different ways. And we've met a lot of challenges. We're still struggling with a lot of challenges, but we've also succeeded in a number of ways. So today, it's a bit about sharing resources and ideas, but it's also kind of a bit of camaraderie and being together. As you have noticed, we have the capability for our microphones and talking to go mute and unmute, but our attendees, our registrants don't. So here I will show the results of our poll. That's who we have here today. You can see that on your own screens and maybe on my shared screen as well. You, the attendees, the registrants out there are not able to speak, but we encourage you right now, if you would like, there's the Q&A button. So please post any questions you have of our panelists about teaching and learning and contacting multilingual and immigrant families and refugee families out there. Please post your questions in the Q&A at any time. We will, oh, I gotta X that out. Our facilitators here will be monitoring that Q&A box as well as our chat box for your comments and your questions. So again, I am Lisa Dorner and I welcome you to this webinar that our team has put together. I'm from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Kim Song is my partner at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and the principal investigator with SEE-TEL. Dawn Thiemann is our program coordinator, and she will be monitoring that Q&A button. She's a previous school administrator and educator of many, many, many different things over the years, and a great support for our project and our work here. And Curtis Jensen actually is not, he may be logging on soon. The Network for Educator Effectiveness and Kendra Christians have been great partners in facilitating this work. So we want to thank them as well. Our panelists today, I'm really, really happy to have been able to put together at such short notice a great set of experts from across the state. So Debra Cole, we've worked with her for a long time right now. Her role is the coordinator for English learner and immigrant education in the Hazelwood School District, which is here in the St. Louis area of Missouri. And we have Monica Curl, a history teacher who will be working with SEE-TEL as one of our teachers into the coming couple of years. And she's from Carthage High School. Carthage is a small town near Joplin, Missouri, in southwest Missouri. And we are also very excited to have Professor Zandra de Araujo here from the University of Missouri, who has been a mathematics teacher in K-12 world, and now is the Associate Professor of Math Education at Mizzou. And then Cammy Goucher, we have our state level coordinator for Missouri English Language Development and World Languages. So she's from DESE, what we call DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And should there be any questions about compliance or other sort of legal issues, we're really happy that Sean Cockrum, who's the director of the Migrant and English Learner Education for the state of Missouri, that he is also here. So thank you all for being here. And again, for everyone out there, thanks for listening to our voices a lot. Please post your Q&A. We do want to have this be an interactive session as much as possible. So please post your questions in that Q&A box while we get started. So we are going to start with another poll, actually. We want to know what have been your biggest challenges right now. And we're limiting this to just one answer. So what has been that stickiest issue that you've been facing recently, right? So whether it's student access to technology, differentiating instruction, motivating students, or even witnessing illness or trauma within families or within your own educational environment, within your school or where you work. What's been that challenging piece for you? This helps give us a sense of what's going on out there right now in your spaces. We assume a lot of our participants are from across the state of Missouri, but I do know that yesterday in our elementary focus webinar, we did have people from elsewhere too. So it's always interesting to see how we're facing similar challenges in different spaces. So thank you for participating. We've got about 72% of the people voting so far. It looks like motivating students, motivating our middle and high school students. I live with two of those right now. And definitely that has been, I can imagine, I can see how that would be a challenge for teachers on the other side of the computer, right, from the home. Differentiating instruction is also something we'll talk about today. And then student access and student knowledge or comfort, or family knowledge or comfort with online learning. It sounds like that's also been something that we're struggling with. I'm glad to see that for not too many people, the top issue is actually witnessing the trauma or difficulty with daily life, but we know that's a real thing out there too. So I'll end that poll and just briefly share those results if you weren't able to see them being posted live. That biggest one is motivating students. So we will be talking about that. So now with that introduction, I am happy to turn it over to our experiences and tips. And we are going to start with Debra Cole, our coordinator for English Learner and Immigrant Education in Hazelwood. So Debra, turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Man, great to see these names, and just to know you're well and that you're well enough to be here is really a joy. I have struggled with these feelings of challenge emotionally, thinking about what some of our students are facing through this time of unknown, and also knowing that before this, they probably also had really stressful experiences. Some of them I know about personally from our students in Hazelwood schools. But I want to focus on our can-dos for these couple of minutes, because it's really depressing, first of all, to think about all the challenges that they face. And sometimes I went to actually a webinar yesterday where Jim Cummins was talking about a 20-year project with a high school in California. And he talked about the importance of looking for the can-dos instead of all the can'ts that exist in our students. And I had already been thinking along those lines. And if you're interested, I can share with you a couple of notes that I took from his presentation. But the main thing our parents and kids can do is speak multiple different languages. Even if they can't read them, our tech tools are so amazing that things can be read to them in their native language and translated instantaneously into English and back and forth, so that, you know, if it sounds silly, they can see what it was about. So the back and forth with the Google Translate tools are just amazing. Also, closed captioning, you can put those on. But I found a couple of these websites that I think I've shared with some of you before, but in particular, probably I've shared with you the Dual Language Showcase. This is an elementary school in Toronto, and you'll have to click on it when you get a copy of the presentation, because they're live linked to these websites. But, you know, when we don't have books in all the languages of our children, this elementary school decided that they would have students and their parents create these books. And they're in the library, and the students are illustrating them. And then the teachers are helping to put the books in 2 languages. It's phenomenal. So check that out. Another thing about this digital divide, that it's not just getting access. I think that, you know, Hazelwood, we're really fortunate that we're a resource-rich district. So we're getting hotspots to everybody who doesn't have one. We're getting Chromebooks. Grade 3 to 12 already have them, and we're able to take them home. And with our EL kids, we're using some of our EL only resources to make sure that our pre-K 2 families also have these materials. But got a call from a principal yesterday where one of our 3rd graders, the family is Spanish speaking, she's also deaf and hard of hearing, and they don't know how to turn on the hotspot. So we're still, you know, it's like getting them the technology is just the very first step. And then making sure they know how to access it and how to use it. And we have one of our EL teachers who's proficient in Spanish and has agreed to drive over and meet them at a socially distant and work with the family to know how to not only turn on the hotspot, but then to log on to our platform, our learning platform for grades 3 through 5. And then how to understand the instructions and how to join a Google Meet so they can talk to their EL teacher first. So there's all of those things. But, you know, even if we fix all of that, the fact remains, and was true before, that our students are not represented very well in the materials and in the online content that we expose them to. So one thing we can do to make content comprehensible to them is go out there and find some native language videos for our high schoolers to listen to learn the content and to understand it before they have to face it in English. So that this digital divide will give you a link to a website that talks about 4 things that we really need for kids to have. These Own Voices children's books, we have our high school students, particularly our newcomers, reading to their younger siblings. And so these Own Voices children's books represent the cultures of these families. It's similar to that Dual Language Showcase. I Am Monologues, that's coming from the EL Ovation website. They have free resources right now. But, you know, helping students talk about their identities, you know, and what they're going through. I'm sure you've seen the History Museum is collecting everyone's stories because this is such a historic moment. Wouldn't it be awesome to collect these stories in multiple languages of the people who live in our towns? And you know, we can help them put them into English or just leave them in their beautiful languages. So that's a tip for, and they have some lesson plans and everything on their website to help with that. And then there's a project called Green Card Youth Stories, which I just found doing preparation for this panel today. It's youth immigrant stories that they are collecting into glossy colored picture books. And the authors of this have, I mean, it comes out of Minnesota, but the whole idea, again, it's similar to the I Am monologues, getting students to talk about their own life experiences, not only during the shutdown, but their immigrant experiences. How did they get here? Why have they come? Where are their barriers? And who has been their advocate? You know, those are the kinds of stories, I think as EL teachers in particular, we have those all important relationships with our students in a really unique way, especially in the high school setting where kids are moving around to multiple classes. They might come to you and no one else. So this is an opportunity to engage them in some literacy activities that are multilingual and connected to them. So hopefully also motivating. That's really it. My tips for the day.
Thank you so much. And we will be sharing this Google Slides, so you'll be able to click on those links. Now I'm going to turn it over to Monica Curl just to give a brief explanation of sort of some of the issues and things you've been facing and how you've been meeting them in Carthage.
Yeah. U.S. history, world history,
it sounds like, sorry to cut you off, it sounds like that video sound is not working for Monica. Okay, so I'm gonna put you on mute, Monica, so we can move on and maybe,
and I have
oh, it's still going even though I muted her. So this is the reality. I'm sure you've all had teaching moments where you've had technology issues as we try to communicate. So Monica, maybe one thing we could try is if you log off and log back in, and we'll hop to our next panelist and then come back to you. So we hope that Monica can get better connected. While we're waiting for Monica to log off and log back in or work on the internet connection there, go ahead and go to the chat button. So Deborah mentioned a few websites and even one recently found, which to me sounds just fabulous. But what are some online tools or maybe resources or websites that you all out there have found, right? I think it's overwhelming sometimes to find everything, but type in a quick chat. Right? Let us know what you found. And then I'm going to turn it over to Zandra, and we can hear from Zandra and then get back to Monica later.
Do you want me to start now? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Zandra. Nice to meet you all virtually. I know this is a tough time for everyone. I'm teaching teachers currently in online classes, and they were online the whole time, so it wasn't a huge transition for me. But my students who are current teachers, I've heard a lot about the challenges that they've been facing. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of our students in rural areas have families who work at meat processing plants, and we know there's been a lot with that. So if you know that's the situation for some of your students, you may want to check in, particularly since we know that there's a lot of viral contagions coming through those places, and that's going to impact students in terms of giving care to younger siblings, and then also a lot of close quarters. So please give grace to your students and check in with them as you're able, because this is tough for everyone, and they're vulnerable oftentimes because a lot of people might be undocumented in those situations, so they feel compelled to work also. with that said, so my expertise are on teaching mathematics broadly and with English language learners in particular. I also have an NSF, a National Science Foundation funded grant that studies flipped mathematics instruction. And so a lot of the things that I've learned through that grant work has also been applicable to the current situation with teaching remotely. And so on this slide, you can kind of see some resources. So I've done a couple of webinars and podcasts for various organizations in math, teacher education, and math education. And then I've also written a blog post with my collaborator, Sam Otten, about what we've learned from using videos to teach mathematics remotely, because I know that a lot of us are using videos currently. I will say also that my niece, kind of a step niece, I guess, she just came here from Brazil not long ago, and I was helping her with her online math homework. And I've learned a lot through that experience because she's still gaining proficiency in English, and she's expected to learn new content online without supports. And my sister is helping her, who's not a native Portuguese speaker. She grew up in the house with Portuguese, but she's not fluent. And so they're trying to communicate and then also teach at the same time. And it is difficult. My sister's not trained in teaching mathematics. And so anecdotally, what I can share is that, yay, Brazilians on chat, I see. Hola. So what I see is that a lot of content is delivered in fun ways through video. So for example, my niece is learning about quadrilaterals, and they shared fun music videos of songs that teach quadrilaterals. Well, if you can imagine trying to learn new content in a song format in a language that you're not proficient in, and then you have to take an iReady quiz on the content afterward, it's complicated and it's really hard. So I think what's happening there is teachers are well-intentioned. They're trying to translate what they do in the classroom typically into this online environment. And what I would say is a tip or a hint that I would say is that don't try to directly translate what you do in the classroom to the online environment. It's two different environments and modalities, and they don't translate well. What you should instead do is think about what your goals are. A lot of districts are not requiring activity from students presently. So in Columbia, in our district, the third quarter grade is the students' grades. That's probably why we're seeing a lack of motivation, because the parents are like, okay, it doesn't count. You already got your grade. Why are you going to move on? And I totally get that. So instead of thinking about new content or, plugging all the gaps, because what's going to happen is gaps are going to get wider and wider as we go on, because the parents who can support their students at home in different ways are going to support them. And they tend to be a different population sometimes than the students that are already behind or need services that they're not getting currently. So maybe think about enrichment or fun math activities or other activities that could get students involved. So for example, at high school, you might give them like just one task to think about or consider different aspects of, have little relays where one person does one part of it, then the next person does another. Elementary school has tons of things where you could read literature books or picture books and look at the math in the picture books and things. So there's ways to engage students that aren't as language intensive, but can still get them talking or counting or thinking about math in ways. And you're just going to have to give a lot of grace, because I don't think a lot of good instruction can happen in the current situation. And that's the reality of it. And when we go back in the fall, if we go back in the fall, we'll have to talk about these gaps and addressing them again. But it's okay. I know there's so much writing on standardized tests and stuff, but it's okay if we say, okay, I'm going to pause new instruction and just really focus on some enrichment or thinking about deeper activities we can do, while also trying to find as good of supports as we can, captioning YouTube videos or sharing translation services, or some of those apps you all are sharing would be really helpful. Google Translate's awesome right now for languages that are written. We have a lot of refugee students that have tribal languages that can't be translated in Google Translate, so we have to think about that as well. But if you have Romance language speakers, they're pretty good. So lots of things to consider. I would just say that give yourself grace and give your students grace, and we're trying the best we can. We'll keep trying, but don't feel like you have to be the all-star teacher every day, because it's a pandemic. It's pretty serious and it's stressful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for starting out and reminding us about the situations in, especially in a lot of our rural areas with the meat packing plants. And I think Monica is back on, and I'm hoping the internet, it could have been our internet, we don't know. It could be a Zoom issue. But Monica was going to talk a little bit about that, that issue of these more rural areas and some of the issues facing them. So I'll turn it over to Monica.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's a little bit better.
Okay. Basically, my biggest issue is just getting into contact with kids. A lot of my students don't necessarily live with their parents. They might live with a guardian, an older sibling, an aunt, uncle, someone like that. So when we have our contact information, usually a lot of my kids, there's one number and then there's their phone number. And when I call the one number, I get a lot of disconnected, this number is no longer in service. Thankfully, I have a para/co-teacher is what I consider her. She also helps me translate when I can't get through to kids, and she is more immersed in our Spanish-speaking culture, and so she's been able to help me find these kids and talk to them, and she's been my biggest resource. If I didn't have her, I wouldn't have contacted half of my kids. But she knows that this uncle is related to this person and is finding ways to contact. That's about it. So I'm struggling to contact them, but otherwise we're focusing on things like if they're okay, not necessarily focusing on all of the assignments, the work, things like that. We're focused on their well-being right now, making sure that they're making it through this.
Thank you, Monica. I turned off your video just to help the audio a little bit, and I think we did catch most of it. So I think that builds a lot on what Zandra was saying, right? Give ourselves some grace. It's not all about hitting the standards, but what kind of activities can we provide for students that we are connecting with, and how can we further try to find the right people to connect with, right? And I think, Monica, you brought up a good point that it's not just contacting parents, right? But it's the caregivers, it's elder siblings, it's, right, other people within households, because it's not always parents that are living with family members, and maybe you also have a lot of families living in one location, like Debra pointed out. Okay, so we have one more brief overview from Cammy, and then we'll go to our live Q&A. So Cammy, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I am Cammy Goucher, the new Missouri English Language Development and World Language Director at DESE. It's a mouthful. My job mostly is to support teachers and districts and their students as throughout their state. And just a little bit about where I come from. I'm from down in the Joplin area, and I just retired after 30 years in education. I taught reading in 5th grade, and then for a little over 18 years, I was an ESL teacher and EL coordinator. I also was a district technology trainer, so I did a lot of flipped learning with my students even before flipped learning was a thing. So I have a little bit of experience with that, and plus I'm married to an IT person, so a little bit more experience with technology there. So first of all, I want to reiterate what some of the other ladies have already said. We're being asked to step up in ways that are unimaginable. I mean, even though you might be doubting yourself right now, I just want to let you know that you are doing what you're doing well. And if you're like me, you're probably becoming a little mentally exhausted because this cognitive load of remote work is taxing on us. And there are a lot of things right now that we can't control, but if we're going to get through this, we have to focus on those things that we can control. And I know that a lot of you are worried during this interruption about the children we're teaching. and the education that they may be missing. But that's not the biggest thing to worry about right now, I don't think. A lot of our English learners, this is the life they came from. They've had interrupted education before, and they've experienced things that are similar to what we're going through, and they've survived this. But the kids that are missing the instruction right now, they're still learning. They're learning other things. They're learning life lessons. That's one of the things I always emphasized in my classroom, was making it real, making the lessons that we teach them things that mean something to them. So a lot of the things that we did in our classrooms, and a lot of things that the ESL teachers tend to do, are thematic and central around a certain theme. And that's a good thing for right now. Our students are learning real life, real world issues right now, pandemics and government, and they're finding all kinds of things that they wouldn't have learned in a classroom. And if there are gaps, we'll fill those in later. But we have to keep a healthy mindset and keep moving forward. And I received something from WIDA today that really says it all. It says we're presented with a reality that's not unlike the first generation of immigrants that came here. They were spending all their time at home with their family members. And the surprising thing about that was that first generations often succeeded academically, and then their children, the dropout rate rose, and they were not achieving as well. And what they've decided was, it was because that first group told rich cultural stories to their children. It was an opportunity to develop their strong oral language skills and tell family histories, and it gave those kids a stronger sense of who they were and who they might be able to become. So one thing I want to urge you is that you have your students and their families take advantage of this time and convey that important family stories, maybe sing some songs in their home languages, and when possible, stories, reading together is a time that's well spent too. And if the books are in English, it's still worth having discussions about them in their home language as comparison. These rich cultural and linguistic interactions make them have a sense of themselves and their primary language skills. And research supports that it's ultimately easier to master a second or even a third language and school learning when your primary language and culture and sense of identity are stronger. So what can you do? Well, first of all, focus what's in your control. This is a message for ourselves and to our students. And it all has to be a mindset, and it's all in that envelope of social and emotional learning. And that's why you're here today. Some self-directed professional development. So something that I want to talk about a little bit is let's remember the process of creating a lesson. That process shouldn't change. We still are required to accommodate. That's the law. We have to take care of our English learners. We can't just give this blanket assignment and say this is for everyone and everyone has to do it. We still have to find ways to make it accessible for our English language learners. And we'll talk about this with our question and answer, I'm sure, a little bit later. But one thing that I want to say about kind of going back to that culture is right now we are, one way that we can have our students writing is by journaling, and kind of goes over with what Debra said a moment ago. Have them write about the experiences they're going through right now, even if it's drawing pictures at the lowest level, because I read in an article said our students are curating history. So 20, 30 years from now, when we look back, they'll have written those things down in their journals, and they are part of history. They're making what we're going to remember in the future. As far as the things on my slide here, I was inspired by some of the questions that were given to us previously that I've been receiving from throughout the state. And so I was challenged to create something, and I found this tool called Wakelet, and I saw that go through the chat a few times. If you haven't looked at it, it's a really cool tool. that you can use on your telephone. And a lot of our parents and families, if they don't have computer or access to online, they almost all have a phone. And with Wakelet, you can just click on the link and it plays right within their tool. And it also has immersive reader within it that reads it and translates it into several different languages. So I created a lesson for lower elementary and upper could go probably into middle school, but there are things in both of them that are good for students all the way through high school that you can take a look at. But just to give you an idea of something that can be done. And then I also gave a professional development Wakelet that has all of the tools that I use to create the lessons that I created. And that's for the teachers. So you can look at those and kind of, if you aren't familiar with how to use one of those tools that I use to create the lesson, this walks you through how to do that. And I also want to encourage you to join our Edmodo group, because right now we are key to each other. People across our state have been amazing me. They have jumped in and they're doing wonderful things, and we collaborate and talk to each other and get ideas from each other. And we do that through Edmodo, and then also our Facebook and our Twitter groups. And of course, you can email or contact me anytime. I have lots of files in my Google files that I can help you create lessons if you like, or I can walk you through how to do something online. I'm happy to help. That's why I'm here. And I love creating, so I'm happy to help you. There we go.
Thank you so much, Cammy, and thanks to all of our panelists so far for sharing their experiences and stories. It looks like we do have questions popping up on the Q&A. Be sure to post them. We will start, though, with a couple questions that we've already had from others. And how are you reaching out to and speaking to your students' families? We've heard a little bit about that from some of you already. I don't know if Monica, did you have anything to add beside what you have already talked about in terms of reaching out to families?
Just that we are not, I was going to say this earlier, we are not a one-to-one school district. So everything that we're having to do is basically through their phone. If we can get a hold of them. That is probably the most difficult part, but once we do reach them, we're finding that at least they're working or they're staying busy with things. So that has been sort of missing.
That's great. Yeah. So the phone has been the main mode of contact. I know some other schools have been even mailing things home or having pickup sites where when they pass out food, people will also pick up packets. So there have been a variety of ways. Deborah, did you have anything to add, or in terms of like in Hazelwood School District, how you've been reaching out?
We've had a few situations where we have needed to go deliver things to their curb because they aren't able to make it to the drop-off points. Our social workers are very responsive with that, and we've built up relationships with them, especially at the high school where our newcomers are, that the social workers just, over a weekend, we got a message once that a student's family was running out of food. They had already gone through the food that we hand out for, the school drop off. And the social worker was amazing. It was similar to what Monica said about her liaison, that she went, picked up food and dropped it off on the curb. And then we were in this conversation, and the EL teacher, Jessica Marty, said, well, what did they say? Oh no, it was Ruth, actually, same family. But Ruth says, what did they say? And the social worker said, they said in broken English, open door, open door, drop it off. So, I mean, it's really an example of whatever it takes. And that's the kind of people that educators of English learners are. We've always had to be. We are the #1 advocates, and we are able to enlist our colleagues too in support of our kids. And I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Dawn, do we want to go to any of the questions in the Q&A now? Is there one that we could throw out to our panelists?
Yes, we definitely have some questions. And one of those is, how are education leaders starting to think about learning recovery when it resumes in the near future?
So learning recovery. Yeah, Cammy, do you want to?
Or ELs,
help us
once
with that?
on-site learning resumes.
Yeah, specifically for English learners.
We are at DESE in the process of talking and discussing what it will look like when school does start back up. We have nothing definite at this time, and a lot of it's going to be left up to the districts. Hopefully it's trying to be as normal as possible and just pick up where we are when we get there. There will be gaps, we know this, but we're hoping that they're not going to be significant at this time. And we're just hoping that things can be as normal as possible. We don't know how things are going to look when it comes time for school to start. So it's kind of right now just watching and seeing what's happening, and then we'll come up with a plan when we get there.
Yeah, I know that St. Louis Public is in the process of figuring out how to do virtual summer school for secondary level in 1 month, I think in July, and then maybe use a couple weeks in August to bring in the elementary and middle school kids for a virtual summer school. So that's some of the ways I think educational leaders in St. Louis are thinking. But Monica, you were also talking about tentative plans in Carthage earlier. Do you want to share what you know right now of some credit recovery plans and supporting students?
Yeah, we're just focusing on the secondary level right now that I know of. But for the month of June, we're focusing on credit recovery and students that need to either retake classes or get those graduation credits. And then in July, we're going to focus more on just taking the lab courses and potentially doing that in the classroom.
Okay, so yeah, so in some areas maybe where the pandemic doesn't seem, as of yet anyway, to have hit very hard, they may be able to do some in-person this summer to work on making up that time, that instructional in-person time. Let's go to the second question on the slide there. How are teachers of students designated as English learners collaborating with classroom and content teachers? So this looks a little bit different when we're thinking about online instruction. Debra, do you want to share any ideas that your district has been doing so far in terms of collaboration among teachers?
Sure, we're doing similar things to what I've seen people putting in the chat box. So for high school students, we're using Launch and Edgenuity for online learning. And so all of our EL teachers at the high school were also trained on those tools and then added to the classrooms as co-teachers for any content class that they have English learners on their caseload in. So they are, most successful stories are when they've been co-teaching already with each other. And so it's very natural for the classroom teacher to share ahead of time, this is what I'm thinking about, and the EL teacher being able to front load then some conceptual ideas as well as vocabulary, things like that. So anything that you have already been doing in the real world in terms of collaboration is, I had one teacher tell me that it's amazing how much stronger the collaboration has become, because that you can meet them virtually almost any time is good for both of you. Whereas when you're at school, you're running through the hallway and you have this thing and bells ringing, and you're lucky to have 3 minutes between a class to collaborate meaningfully. Well, it's not meaningful as these even 15-minute conversations about what students need. So that's been a real silver lining.
Yeah, that's great. I know we had a question yesterday where collaboration was still challenging for English learner teachers that have so many teachers across so many different grade levels. I don't know if there's any thoughts, Cammy, maybe you have about that or about the question there.
I'll share what I shared yesterday. since this has all started, I go on to all the districts' websites and kind of look what everyone's doing. And I've looked at different states, what they're doing, social media. And one thing I found that was very interesting at a school is their district put a list of all of the teachers' names on one page so that the students could go there to find their lessons rather than emails from several different teachers coming out and bombarding their parents and their inbox of their email. The students themselves were responsible for going and checking what the teachers were doing. So there was a long list of all of the teachers' names. The students clicked the name and got their assignments from that teacher. But the other teachers also, like the EL teacher and others that might have input for those students, had access to those files as well. And they could put accommodations in that box for the lesson, or the teacher could look at the lesson too and add some tweaks that would be good for the students. And maybe they might send a personal email to that student and tell them, this was your lesson. I looked and I saw, this is what you can do. And I thought that was a really good idea. And then I know some of our smaller districts, more rural districts, have contacted public broadcasting, PBS, and they're doing some, excuse me, some lessons on the television, like for an hour every day. And one district that I looked at, they had like math on Monday, science on Tuesday, social studies on Wednesday, and the teachers kind of rotate through and take turns presenting lessons. If you go to the Arkansas State page, they have joined with PBS and they are doing all of their lessons, and they have some great ideas on how to do that. I've heard of others that are doing radio broadcasts for those students who don't have access to internet. So there are some unique and clever ways that we're getting around this and working through this. Another thing that I saw that was very interesting, rather than taking some of the packets to door, there are a couple of districts that set up a site outside like Walmart where families go to get their groceries, and the families pick up their packets there as they're getting their groceries for the week. So those are just a few of the things that I've found that have been helpful.
That's excellent. So that's one of the things we often talk about when we think about immigrant family engagement is go to families where they are going, right? Whether it's a local church, not right now, but right now everyone is going shopping for groceries. So meeting them where they're at. And it sounds like district leaders and principals can help by consolidating areas of our online spaces from the family point of view, right? I do remember when online learning started for my daughter, I looked at her email and it was worse than mine. It was like 5 emails from this teacher and 2 emails. It just must have felt overwhelming for a 12-year-old who wasn't used to that. And here we live in a resource-rich, English-speaking household. So we can only imagine what that might be like for multilingual and immigrant and refugee families. So Dawn, do we have another question there from the Q&A box?
Yes.
That we can throw out?
Yes, we do. We have a couple, but this is rather interrelated. Is there a way to access student screens to help them? What they want to know is, do you recommend certain tools to be able to assist your students in a virtual learning?
Right. So are there tools that, like live tools, like the whiteboard kind of things that you can write on? Or I don't know, Zandra, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I think some of the people said like Zoom, you can share, if you have access to Zoom, you can share a screen. I think Facebook, but most of you won't use Facebook with students. And then what I did with my niece is she just held up her phone and took video, like we were video chatting, and she held her phone to the screen so I could see what she was looking at. And that was easier. I think there's a number of suggestions going on in the chat as well.
Okay, that's helpful. Great. Here's another quick chat, and then we'll get back to our Q&A. And this might be especially for specialists out there, the English learner, teachers, coaches, or any school or district leaders. But could be any of you out there. Do you have any inspirational or heartwarming stories, experiences that you want to share that could help us think about a new way to approach something in our own context, and also just have a picture of that good work that is happening, like we've heard about. Okay, so our next question that we pre-prepared here is, how can I make online grade level work comprehensible for students designated as English learners. And I think we're going to throw this first out to Cammy, if you have an idea or two beyond what you've already mentioned. I think people have already mentioned a lot of great ideas here. Oh, Cammy, yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Thanks.
Well, the first thing, again, I want to say is go back to your teaching. I mean, good teaching that we were doing before this all started, continue with that. We want to make sure we look at the students' can-dos. We want to look at their performance on the access, but don't look at that overall score. Look at their individual domains scores. So if they were high in listening and medium in reading and really low in writing, you're going to gear your instruction to fit where the student is. So you might have to give them some pictures and labeling and lots of visuals if they're low level of proficiency, or if they're higher, you can give them short sentences and sentence frames and things like that to fill in. Our can-do descriptors and language functions, those are all really important right now, and we have to keep accommodating the students' needs. Let's see, I think that's about it. Just make sure we're doing what we've always been doing and accommodate for those students.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to share on that particular idea beyond what you've said? Deborah? Yeah.
I want to jump in here to share a resource that I learned from Rob Greenhaw. I think he's on the webinar today too. It was talk, read, and then write after a series of, and it's differentiated between, you know, lower entering proficiency students, intermediate, and higher level students. So it's just what we have practiced before with chunking text and talking about it first, then reading it, talking about it more frequently for students who are just emerging in their language proficiency. But, you know, with a grade level text. So that it's just, we just really want you guys to keep scaffolding up, you know, because when we try to bring it down to what kids can do, then we're not really promised to provide grade level access to the curriculum. So less is more, though. I want to say that again, based on what Zandra shared with us, less is more. And if we can talk in between really essential understanding. So I think Cammy also already mentioned this. Pick those essential questions, those most important thing, they got to get this. And then, you know, put them in a group where they can really make their, Rob posted it, talk, read, talk, write for ELs, and he's got the link in the chat. So thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Rob, out there. I think there were also some ideas I've seen too about, you know, maybe we don't have as much of that interactive time with families or students, but perhaps suggesting, right, other people within their household that they could do that with. So if there are older siblings or an aunt or an uncle, as of course time allows, like Zandra has already mentioned, we also do have to remember the challenges and the workload that are facing families. Yeah, Deborah.
That reminds me, the talk doesn't have to be in English.
That's right. I was going to say that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, thank you.
Right, exactly, right? So the talk and the understanding things, Cammy mentioned that I think earlier too, can be done in home languages as well to move people on. Dawn, do we have another question from the audience?
Yes, we do. And this question comes from a science teacher who teaches chemistry and physics, sharing videos of content and demos. How can I make the subjects more relatable to our students via virtual learning?
So the question is, if I understand it right, so there are videos out there perhaps of different, say, science experiments or something, right? And the question is, how do you take something like that and make it more comprehensible?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone, Cammy, have some ideas?
Sure. One great thing, find some videos. I don't know if you're familiar with Edpuzzle, but you can take a video and segment it into sections and stop at points. You can use voiceover and give a verbal explanation. You can give questions to stop and help them to think. There are all kinds of tools like that that you can use. Also breaking things down and making them in shorter bursts where it's not all at once, but giving them, take the document and take out all of the extra things that they don't have to know and just focus in on those key elements of the lesson that they need. So start with vocabulary, make sure they understand the vocabulary before you give them the lesson. I put several tools to address that in that professional development toolkit that I made and address some of those things. And I also gave a sample science lesson on epidemiology. So there you go. But there are different tools that you can use just to break down the learning into smaller chunks. So rather than having them watch one long video and then ask them questions, use tools like that Edpuzzle that breaks it into sections for them.
Awesome. That is excellent. We are all becoming newly proficient in different technology tools. Zandra, do you have something to add on that one?
Yeah. So as you're able, like, you can't do all science experiments at home, but like if there's ones that the kids could do, like physics, I mean, you could drop something off a building or whatever, you know, like you could do things where like the kids do it and then they could watch a video that makes it more relevant, or you could like build anticipation. So there's more of that inquiry kind of aspect, like Cammy was saying with the Edpuzzle. You could stop the video and say like, what do you think is going to happen when I mix these two things, or do a burn test with this one thing in chemistry? This is going way back. I'm a mathematician, but so like, you know, thinking about ways that you could build in anticipation so it's more relevant, because it's exciting to see like what's going to happen. I don't know. And there's some really high quality science videos already made that you can caption on YouTube. But letting kids do some of these experiments, if they have access to materials or anticipating themselves, or making a video of them doing safe experiments would be fun if they're able to also.
Super. Thank you so much. Let's go to that next question, because this was one of our main things that even popped up early on in the poll. How can I motivate students in this environment? Well, Zandra, we were going to start with you on that one. So do you want to hit this one, and then we'll go to Monica too?
Sure. I would say that providing choice is like always my go-to for motivation. So if you can imagine as a teacher and you were told everything you have to do in every order, it's very demotivating. Like, I don't want to do it. I get obstinate myself. But if you say, like, think about your lessons in terms of like, this week, what do I want kids to get out? And can I give them like 5 options and they have to do 2, instead of saying like, you have to do all 5 of these. And maybe some of them are like less language intensive or have more multimedia, or they get to choose which multimedia they engage with, or maybe some of them are printed, or they have the option to do it on the phone, or they have the option to do it online, depending on what devices. So that way everybody gets to choose, and you're not making assumptions about what they have access to or who they have access to. So I think the more choice you can provide kids, the better. Always. And then the more hands-on and like, so it's not so passive, because a lot of online learning turns very passive, and that's very boring. So like, I have 6 hours of search committee meetings after this to sit on. I try my best, but it is very passive. I wait for one opportunity to ask one question in that 6 hours, you know? So, and I have a lot of schooling. I have like so many degrees and stuff, and I still get bored, and I'm an adult. You can only imagine students. I've seen teachers make an hour-long video. It's not humane at that point, right? To learn math for an hour remotely. So think about like choice, think about ways to make it a little more flexible, and then think about, are students still actively engaged, or are they just passive? And you want to really make sure that there's a lot of active learning going on still.
I'll have to say, we hope we're modeling that just a tiny bit with the active polling and the Q&A. And we're going to cut this off in a few minutes because we're almost hitting that hour mark. Monica, I don't know if you had anything to add about the motivation or anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I myself am not using choice board because I'm having to collaborate with an entire department. But a couple of my friends are using choice boards for their individual classes, and they're finding a great success with that. So if you can do that with your class, I highly recommend, you know, assign 5 things, tell them to pick 2 or whatever you need for your points. The other thing is, I found that after I contacted my kids and explained to them that I'm concerned about their well-being, they actually started doing my work. before I had contacted them, before I could get a hold of them, they hadn't turned the thing in. So I do think that just you being there and them knowing that you care, they're going to reciprocate and do the work for you.
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much. I think, Dawn, I'm guessing we have a few more questions out there we haven't gotten to, but it is a minute to noon. So is there one quick one?
I believe so. One of the questions is if Cammy or Sean could speak to how is DESE wanting us to approach reclassification this year? Will it only be based off of access scores alone?
Well, that's still going to be up to the districts on who reclassifies and who not. We know that you will have the access scores. Those are still due to be coming to districts in the next few weeks. We also know that they've lost out on a lot of instruction over the last couple months, and that this can be a tough decision. It does, if you're trying to get exit a student on their portfolio work, that'll be really tough. But we know if from a liability standpoint, where would I get in the most trouble? If we exited a child too early, is not as good as if we kept them in. So if they're borderline, if they're close, if their access score wasn't the 4.7, my recommendation is that you would hang on to them. You can exit them in the middle of the year. You can exit them later on from services. But it's really going to be a district decision, and I would recommend that you err on the side of keeping them identified as an English learner.
That was exactly what I was going to say. You don't have to exit them at the end of the year. You can wait and do a little work with them at the beginning of the year and see where they are. And we're not requiring you to enter those exits right now, so you can hold off.
All right, thank you, Dawn, for organizing all the Q&A. For the questions that we may have missed, we are going to try to post some answers to those on some blogs over the next couple weeks, and we should be able to get this video to you to share with colleagues within a day or two. But I'm going to turn it over to Kim just to thank everybody for their participation and to conclude our webinar.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coordinating and leading this dialogue. Since, it's like 12:02, and it seems like we have a lot of things still to talk. So I think the effort we have put for this dialogue is working. So thank you, and thank you, the panelists, for your time and your commitment. And with all of this effort and expert and classroom teachers and administrators, I see some light. And as one of the panelists said, I think it is Zandra, it's not the same. You really have to think about the perspectives of this online portion. So you have to think about how you can deliver this one with your students, and the motivation is going to occur if they can understand. Comprehensible is the very important thing. And then the other thing is when you do the 6 through 12, and do not give like a big pictures on kindergarten ELs are having. Give them some developmentally appropriate one, and use a lot of gestures and stand up and down and some physical responses as well. And thank you for the opportunity for the SEE-TEL to lead this dialogue, and have a good day. Thank you.